In 1949, John Wayne shared the screen in Sands of Iwo Jima with three real veterans whose names had become inseparable from one of the most famous photographs in American history: Ira Hayes, John Bradley, Rene Gagnon. To the American public, they were the three surviving men from Joe Rosenthal's photograph of 6 servicemen raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. But today, the United States Marine Corps says something extraordinary. Only one of those 3 men, Ira Hayes, is actually in the famous photograph. Bradley and Gagnon were not imposters. Both had genuinely been on Mount Suribachi, and both had important roles in the events surrounding the flags. But the 2 bodies in Rosenthal's photograph, long identified as them, belonged to 2 different Marines. So how did an error become accepted history surviving a massive war bond campaign, a John Wayne movie, and more than half a century of scrutiny? And how did researchers finally prove who those 2 Marines really were? The confusion begins with the fact that popular memory often compresses into a single moment. There were 2 flag raisings on Mount Suribachi on February 23, 1945. The first came after Marines reached the summit during the Battle of Iwo Jima. Staff Sergeant Lewis Lowery photographed that first flag as it went up. Navy Corpsman John Bradley was there. He really did help raise an American flag on Suribachi. But that is not the image most Americans know. The first flag was replaced by a larger one. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal was on the summit when the replacement went up. He caught 6 men leaning into the pole in a single frame, their faces mostly hidden, their bodies overlapping. That second image became the icon. Ira Hayes was one of the men in Rosenthal's frame. Rene Gagnon also had a real role. The Marine Corps' current account credits him with carrying the larger second flag to the summit and returning the first flag for safekeeping. The distinction sounds simple when we can stop the film, enlarge photographs, and compare records decades later. In early 1945, it was anything but simple. The battle was still being fought. The men on the summit had not assembled for a portrait. Rosenthal had captured a working party in motion, with faces obscured and uniforms that looked almost identical at a glance. And very quickly, Washington needed names. The photograph spread across the United States with extraordinary speed. President Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted the men pictured in it brought home to support the upcoming 7th War Loan Campaign. On March 30, 1945, Headquarters Marine Corps ordered the servicemen who actually appeared in Rosenthal's photograph transferred to the United States by air. But there was an immediate problem. 3 of the 6 men in the famous photograph, Michael Strank, Harlan Block, and Franklin Sousley, did not survive Iwo Jima. The 3 men returned to the public as the surviving flag raisers were Hayes, Bradley, and Gagnon, and the official list of 6 seemed settled. It wasn't. The first crack appeared almost immediately after the war. One of the men at the base of the pole had initially been identified as Sergeant Henry Hansen. Ira Hayes knew that identification was wrong. In July 1946, responding to a letter from Harlan Block's mother, Hayes stated that the man was Block, not Hansen. The Marine Corps opened an investigation. In January 1927, the Del Val Board officially corrected the record. Harlan Block replaced Henry Hansen. That should have been the warning. If one figure in the photograph had been misidentified, perhaps the picture was not as settled as everyone believed, but for nearly 7 more decades, the other names remained. If you enjoy discovering the real military history behind the images and movies America remembers, subscribe to Forgotten War Stories, because the next mistake would take almost 70 years to uncover. By the time the first correction came, the photograph had already become something larger than a battlefield image. Hayes, Bradley, and Gagnon had joined the 7th War Loan Campaign. The actual second flag traveled on a 33-city journey. The drive began in May 1945 with a national goal of $14 billion. It raised more than $26 billion. The 3 survivors posed with the flag. Their faces appeared beside reproductions of Rosenthal's photograph. For millions of Americans, they gave names and faces to 6 almost anonymous figures leaning into a flagpole. Then came Hollywood. In 1949, Sands of Iwo Jima put John Wayne at the center of a fictional marine story built around the Pacific battles of Tarawa and Iwo Jima. The film also featured cameo appearances by the surviving flag raisers, Hayes, Bradley, and Gagnon. The movie did not invent the identification. It reflected the official history of its time. And that matters, because the mistake was now embedded in layers of American memory, wartime publicity, photographs, ceremonies, books, the Marine Corps War Memorial, in a movie that would be rerun for generations. To challenge one of those names, researchers would need more than a hunch. They would need to reconstruct a few seconds on a volcanic summit in 1945. In 2014, researchers Stephen Foley and Eric Krell drew attention to a problem with the figure long identified as John Bradley. The equipment and uniform details did not fit. Their evidence eventually reached the Marine Corps, which convened an official review. The whole eye panel examined archival photographs, eyewitness statements, documents, and motion picture footage shot on the summit by Marine combat cameraman William Jnost. The investigators could compare details that had been easy to miss in a famous image reproduced millions of times. How a rifle sling was attached, the shape and condition of a helmet strap, the way clothing sat on the body, and where individual men could be traced in photographs taken around the same moment. In 2016, the Marine Corps announced the result. John Bradley was not in Rosenthal's famous photograph. The man long believed to be Bradley was Private First Class Harold Schultz. For anyone who knew Bradley's story, this sounded almost impossible. Bradley had spent decades associated with the photograph. He had stood beside it during the war bond campaign. His name had long been associated with one of the figures represented in the Marine Corps War Memorial. But the correction did not erase what Bradley actually did on Iwo Jima. He was a Navy corpsman. He had been on Suribachi. He had participated in the first flag raising, and he later received the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism while treating wounded Marines during the battle. The history had combined two real events into one famous image. The stranger part was Schultz. He had lived until 1995 without being officially recognized as one of the men in Rosenthal's photograph. Why he remained mostly silent about it is not known with certainty. The Marine Corps' own historical study discusses possible explanations, but there is no documented answer strong enough to turn speculation into fact. For 71 years after the photograph was taken, the wrong man had occupied Schultz's place in the national memory. And even after that correction, the list was still not finished. The 2016 investigation created a new question. If the old identifications had been wrong once in 1947 and wrong again in 2016, what else had everyone missed? In 2018, researcher Dustin Spence sent retired Marine Major General Orlo Steele a 102-slide presentation built on research by Stephen Foley and Brent Westemeyer. One of its central claims challenged the man long identified as Rene Gagné. This time, the investigation could draw on a remarkable visual archive. Photographer Robert Campbell had captured the first flag being lowered while the second flag was being raised in the background. Other photographs showed Marines before and after the event. William Janowa's motion picture film preserved their movement. High-resolution scans revealed details that older reproductions had buried. The Marine Corps then brought in the FBI's Digital Evidence Laboratory. Analysts used facial comparison tools and manual examination. They traced individuals across Janost's film. They compared helmet covers, clothing, footwear, weapons, and equipment. Even the position of the flag as it moved in the wind helped relate still photographs to the motion picture sequence. The evidence pointed to another Marine, Corporal Harold Keller. Keller's face, the creases created by the bandoliers across his jacket, and the distinctive folds and camouflage pattern on his helmet cover matched the man in the position attributed for decades to Gagné. In 2019, the Bowers Board reached its conclusion with what it described as extremely strong support. The man in that position was Harold Keller. It was not Rene Gagné. The Marine Corps officially changed the roster again. Now return to that 1949 John Wayne movie. The three famous surviving flag raisers who appeared in Sands of Iwo Jima were Ira Hayes, John Bradley, and Rene Gagné. Under the Marine Corps' current official identification of Rosenthal's photograph, only Hayes is actually visible in that famous frame. Bradley's place belongs to Harold Schultz. Gagné's place belongs to Harold Keller. But this is where the story is easy to tell badly. Bradley and Gagné were not false heroes. Bradley really helped raise the first American flag on Suribachi and earned the Navy Cross for his actions as a corpsman on Iwo Jima. Gagné really carried the larger replacement flag to the summit. The Marine Corps explicitly states that he made a significant contribution to the second flag raising, even though he is not pictured in Rosenthal's photograph. The error was not about whether these men served. It was about attaching the right names to six partially hidden figures in one fraction of a second, And the John Wayne film did not conceal some secret that Hollywood already knew. It preserved what Americans, historians, and the Marine Corps itself believed at the time. That makes the truth more interesting, not less. The final official roster of the 6 men in Rosenthal's photograph is Harlan Block, Harold Keller, Franklin Sousley, Michael Strank, Harold Schultz, and Ira Hayes. 2 of those names, Keller and Schultz, were missing from the famous Images official story for most or all of their lives. Keller died in 1979, 4 decades before the Marine Corps formally recognized him in the photograph. Schultz died in 1995, 21 years before his recognition. Neither man lived to see his name placed where history now says it belonged. That is why the corrections matter. Rosenthal's photograph never changed. The courage represented in it never changed. The battle did not change. What changed was our ability to give credit to the right men. And more than 70 years after John Wayne stood beside the 3 men America knew as the surviving Iwo Jima flag raisers, the most surprising part of that scene is no longer what Hollywood showed. It is the 2 men history had not yet learned to see. If you want more forgotten war stories that sound impossible but really happened, subscribe and follow us.